ADOS is off course. ADOS is way off course. It's a very bad thing, the direction that it is going, right, the way that it's going now, even though the intentions were and are good. Where it's going right now is badly, badly off course. So let me explain that and then go back to the example. And it's the example of a space shuttle. Okay. So it's way off course because there isn't enough attention to how ADOS is being defined in terms of the race. Okay, it's way off course. And so just as we went along with the term minority, we went along with the term diversity, thinking that that was going to take care of, when I say we, I'm talking about Black Americans during the 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s. We went along with that thinking that that was going to be something that was going to address our particular problems. And we found out that it wasn't, because it wasn't specific enough, and then you ended up with just about anyone, everybody and anybody benefiting except for the American descendants of slavery. and and the way that ADOS is defined right now, it's going to go the same way because there is no racial specifier, and nobody wants to raise that issue, right? So that, you know, this to say that, well, there's a racial specifier in that William Darity, who is the person who is the, primary consultant that Yvette Carnell is using on Breaking Brown Channel, to craft this whole strategy. His is the best, but it's still woefully inadequate. And I think so much of him. But what he's saying is, as long as a person has been identifying as black for 10 or more years, that should work. And he specifically said that he wasn't taking into account phenotype, and that is going to be disastrous. If you can't take into account phenotype, that will be disastrous. In this stream, we're going to rate somebody who, you know, well, it's Carmelo Anthony, okay? And that's going to be Kofi who's going to be rating him. But Carmelo Anthony, no, not Carmelo Anthony, not him, sorry. It is Dwayne Johnson. So Dwayne Johnson is known to have a air quote black father and a Samoan mother. Okay? So a black father and a Samoan mother, and if he uses the traditional one drop rule, which a lot of people are still doing, if you have a one black parent, however that's defined, it just means they self-identified as black, that makes you black. And so quite possibly Dwayne Johnson could say that he's ADOS, even though because he may have, I'm not going to say probably, I don't know what he checked, but he may have been checking black on the census box, on the US Census box, for 10 years because he has a black father from Canada and a Samoan mother. Okay? And, well, you'll have to decide for yourself, if he were walking down the street, and we're going to talk about it, whether or not you would think this was a black man. There are many problems with the way that it is defined now. The only way to make sure that 3 or 4 generations from now, black people aren't hovering in a corner, still suffering even worse than we are now, where actual American descendants of slaves who had the majority of their ancestors enslaved, having gone through Jim Crow and so on, are, off in a corner suffering. And there are all these other people who had 1 or 2 ancestors who actually went through all of that, who look nothing like we do today, who are reaping all the benefits. And if we don't take care of that now, even though there's all this enthusiasm, and no one wants to get into the details right now because we want to keep the enthusiasm, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. I'll go back to the example. I remember watching I think it was Discovery. I remember that blowing up in the air. I just happened to be sitting in my car taking a break on my job. I was a teacher at the time, but I just happened to be sitting in the parking lot and taking a break, and not smoking because I'm not a smoker. And I just saw all this weird white stuff in the clear blue sky. I was in Linwood, California at the time. And of course, the space shuttle took off in Florida, and I just wondered what it was. It was just the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen. Clearly, it looked like something had blown up. And I just happened to, then I got up and I went into the teacher's lounge, and everybody was watching the television about how the space shuttle had just blown up in midair. And we now know the history of that is that they had been getting warnings from engineers all along. It doesn't look like one of these. There was a particular part that failed. It was a little rubber ring. It was like a washer, little in comparison to the space shuttle. I don't know how big it was, but it wasn't that big. But the integrity of that piece and that piece holding, certain engineers kept giving from the, I remember because it was such a controversial thing. The company, the contractor for the Defense Department was a company called Thiokol, and there were engineers from Thiokol and also engineers from the Air Force, but mostly within the company, who were saying it's not ready to go. We're not sure that that thing is safe. It hasn't passed safety tests. But everybody was so enthusiastic about the next shuttle launch that they just kept shutting down all of the objections that the O-ring wasn't ready to go. And it ended up stalling out the space shuttle program for I don't know how many years, and killing all the people who were aboard, and of course making widows and orphans of the children of those people. And there are so many examples in history where you just go along to get along, to try to keep the enthusiasm for something, and you don't want to hear the naysayers. I am not a go along to get along person. I would be if it didn't have critical errors. I'm not just in this to be a quote unquote hater, or to take over somebody's to try to steal somebody's shine. That's not what this is about. I am telling you that if we do not have a test is based in phenotype, a way to measure not only that you have lineage who endured American slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and all of that, but that you inherited the cast and cost of that because you still look like that. If we don't have a way to measure that, we're going to have an O-ring space shuttle failure on this whole ADOS reparations movement. Okay? I'm not wanting to give up my cut. It's not a small thing. And when I say my cut, I'm not going to be, here long enough to benefit from it. But I have, great nephews. Possibly sometime in the future, I might, outside chance, have a grandchild. But I have people who I'm adopting, millennials who I'm adopting, who I'm figuring out how to leave what I've got left to the people who will use it most constructively, right? And also to the people for whom I have affection. But yeah, I'm looking down the road. I'm looking to what's going to happen to them. They said the Native American, and I could say that was black people, but let's say it's the Asiatic straight-haired one. They say Native Americans say that you make decisions based upon what's going to happen 7 generations out. And I can tell you it won't even take 7 generations if we don't correct this phenotype being an absolute requirement to being ADOS. I can tell you what's going to happen 7 generations, much less than that out. Okay? Black people are going to be in a world of hurt. We're going to be like the Native Americans with the dark skin and the slanted eyes who are drinking themselves to death on reservations, while all the blonde-haired Cherokees reap the benefits. That is what is going to happen. It's time to talk about that now. Okay, I like unity, but let's get unity on the right page. And I'm going to tell you something. I'm stopping in the middle of this to emphasize this. I am sure that there were people who amongst our ancestors, who rang the alarm about what was happening on the continent of Africa, who rang the alarm about what was happening in the Pacific Islands, who rang the alarm in the Americas, okay, who knew what was going to happen. They could see generations out what was going to happen if we didn't start have some hard lines racially. And for whatever reason, whatever uh, congregation where people were discussing whatever trade they were going to do and whether or not they were going to go to war or whether or not they were going to let people intermarry and settle their boats. There were people who were ringing the alarm, but there were other people who thought the benefits were going to be greater if you just went along with whatever the program was to do trade with these non-black people. And they were the people who were ringing the alarm were like the engineers at Thiokol with the shuttle that blew up in the air. They were ignored. And so I am sure that Kofi and I are in a long line of ancestors who tried to ring the alarm about a problem that nobody wanted to talk about because they were enthusiastic about something. I am sure there are people who rang the alarm about the use of the word minority in the 60s and 70s. We don't hear about them. They've been squashed out of history. But we see where it led us. This is the time to discuss it, not later. And it's the time not to just discuss it, but to get it right. Stop being so scurry. Stop being so scared to hurt people's feelings and exclude it. Because hurting people's feelings, excluding them, making them find their own place to go, does not compare to the death and suffering that's going to happen to us if we don't get what's coming to us. And when I say what's coming to us, I don't even necessarily mean what's going to come to us through reparations because I mean, I think we'll probably get something. Are we going to get what we need? Absolutely not. I understand how anti-blackness, the system of that works. But even for our self-repair, if we start using self-repair, our resources, and giving that away to people who are not black, it's going to be the same. We're never going to dig our way out of this mess. We just aren't.